hope my microphone works. Yes. Minister, distinguished panelists, now it's time to turn our minds and thoughts, ideas to security sector. And as you noticed from the programs, and today we are covering three main areas. So the first one was economic sector, which we very lively and I think very richly debated a short moment ago. Now it's time to go to security sector. And Turkish ambassador already in his intervention in the first panel mentioned that if we look at Central Asia, then there are two decisive issues at the core of its political agenda, and its security and stability. And for very long years, when we are looking backwards to Afghanistan, then indeed there was no even need to talk about security. Today's situation is much more diverse. And even despite the fact that security in Afghanistan is taken care of by national armed forces, so international presence is still very strong there. But Central Asia was very much mentioned as one of the group of countries standing on the borders, but security inside the Central Asia was not appreciated, I think, in political and academic discourse sufficiently enough. So therefore, to a very large extent, today we are not going to talk about Afghanistan. Of course, we will mention it along the lines, you cannot avoid this issue anyway. But the core of discussion today is exactly what is happening in Central Asia. What is security agenda in this country, and how those in this region, and how 5 regional countries are trying to address their regional and national security agendas. So therefore our focus will be mostly on what is happening in Central Asian countries, but of course other factors are playing a very big role. We have 4 excellent speakers. I cannot imagine a better panel as this one. So thank you, gentlemen, for accepting our invitation. We will start with our Latvian Minister of Foreign Affairs, Edgars Rinkēvičs, who has a very distinguished career in policy making and in politics as well. So I would like just to remind the audience that Mr. Rinkēvičs was the State Secretary at the Ministry of Defense exactly during those years when we were fixing our security and stability issues, joining the European Union and NATO, and security issues were always on Mr. Rinkēvičs' plate. Then we have Alain Délétroz, who is a senior associate fellow at the FRIDE think tank based in Brussels, but focusing on a very wide range of issues. And he was also vice president at the International Crisis Group, so which has a very big role to play as a second track diplomacy actor in solving different issues. So he was also at the International Committee of the Red Cross in Moscow, so which gives you another experience and perspective in this region, and very many other interesting jobs which Alain Délétroz was taken during his long career. Then we have Ambassador Professor Phunchok Stobdan from India. He was ambassador at Kyrgyzstan, so he has very good knowledge of this region. Ambassador, I read your book which you gave me in India a year ago, and I could really, with great pleasure, say that this is one of the best books about Kyrgyzstan which I read, because this is a story, insider story, if I may call it so, very detailed, going layer by layer of Kyrgyzstan society and giving a very first-hand information. And at the present moment, he works at the Center for Strategic and Regional Studies, and is also very well known as an expert who publishes his articles in Indian and international media. Then I also would like to present another ambassador, Ambassador Ashok Sakhyabyar, who was Indian ambassador in Latvia. So therefore he has very good knowledge of Latvian affairs, but besides of that he was also ambassador in Kazakhstan. So therefore you are one of quite unique representatives in this panel who has knowledge of both sides of the coin, if I may call it so. And also Ambassador writes quite a lot about international affairs, about Central Asia and India in the leading magazines and journals. So therefore, thank you, Ambassador, for coming, and we really appreciate your expertise on this issue. So how we will proceed, so since Minister has to leave a little bit earlier because he has budgetary debate on his shoulders at the moment, so I think, Minister, you should thank us that we are taking you away a little bit from political debate and throwing into more academic and policy relevant discussion. And what I would like to start with, so we will continue on the same more discussion type of a note which was already taken during the previous session. And could you please, very shortly, as a first round of warming ourselves up, what would be your vision? What is security agenda in Central Asian countries? What are main threats? And later on we will switch to what other countries, region and institutions can do there. So now, what is your vision of security agenda in 5 Central Asian countries and in region in general? Minister, could we start with you, please?
Well, thank you very much. And of course, thank you for getting me out of the parliament where we are discussing next year's budget. And you just got me out from the most important issue, which is the pay raise for ministers. So you may imagine I will be missing the most important part.
We will take care of you, don't worry.
Hopefully. On a more serious note, I'm pretty pleased to be here and share some thoughts with you, particularly taking into account that during our presidency of the European Union Council, EU relations with Central Asia have been one of the priorities, and I am quite proud of what we have been able to achieve. We have got in June the new EU Central Asia strategy approved. We have got some good initiatives moving, for instance the high-level dialogue on security, the first ever EU Central Asia counterterrorism seminar. So apart from issues that are related to cooperation in energy sector, apart from cooperation in the education as well as transportation sectors, I think that we have got the renewed EU Central Asia agenda. But obviously one of central issues, and during the presidency on behalf of High Representative Federica Mogherini, I chaired 2 meetings. One was EU Uzbekistan, another was EU Kazakhstan. We are also preparing for broader EU Central Asia meetings later after our presidency. One of pressing issues, of course, is the security. And just to be rather short, ministers do not tend to talk in a short manner, so we can take 40 minutes, 45 minutes, but I have very distinguished panelists here who are more experts than I do. From my perspective, I would say that I see 3 major security challenges. I don't want to speak about threat, but I think that we see the 3 major security challenges. The first, obviously, that if you talk with representatives of all Central Asian nations, and if we look at the situation as it is developing, it is of course also raising extremist ideologies, terrorists, fight against terrorism, domestic, as well as of course some influence from abroad. And here I do believe that while we all share the same goal, that we have to tackle this challenge seriously, of course you have obviously some difficulties because unfortunately to some extent, sometimes we cannot define precisely whom we can consider terrorist and whom not, for very different reasons, of course, of also internal political development in every and each of those countries. Second, I do believe that we have to understand that, well, we like to speak about the Baltic region, about some Balkan region, some regional cooperation setting. The relations between Central Asian nations are not, as we sometimes tend to understand, the regional cooperation. There are definite tensions, and I think that one raising issue we have to always remember is the scarcity of resources, particularly water resources. We have seen some tension between countries like Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. We have seen the same level of discussion to some extent between Kyrgyzstan and Uzbekistan. So we should understand also that there are some internal security issues within the region. And I have been talking with all my colleagues, foreign ministers, also with presidents of many of those countries, offering also some kind of assistance we have developed also within the European Union. For instance, in the European Union we have some good experience and good lessons learned from how to manage, for instance, rivers and water flows from one country to another country. We have also offered some good offices in let's say fostering dialogue rather than let's say competition or confrontation. But I believe that this is one issue we have to really look at as regional security challenge, as well as, of course, different level of possible ethnic tensions that can be also sometimes cross-border tensions. So the region itself is not as coherent as sometimes we think, but I would hope that the fact that, for instance, very recently US Secretary of State was visiting Central Asia and meeting with all foreign ministers of Central Asian nations, we have had consultations at the level of Central Asian foreign ministers or deputy foreign ministers and the EU representatives. Also, there is some kind of dialogue is a positive sign, and that should be encouraged. And finally, well, I don't want to go into detail, but I think that we all understand that Afghanistan is still the major issue. And the development within Afghanistan is something that all Central Asian countries are very interested to see as a development towards stability, towards security. Also, again, because those who have lived in Soviet times still remember the Soviet invasion, also the situation as it was evolving in Central Asian republics. Also now, after 2001, many of Central Asian nations have played a very constructive role. Actually, to some extent, I think that NATO member states have rediscovered Central Asia actually because of the need to provide so-called northern transit route or redistribution network, first to United States troops, then to also other NATO nations. That's how actually more interest was generating in both NATO and then European Union. But then here again, while we see that we all share the same concern about Afghanistan, also we all understand that sometimes our approaches may differ. And that's where we sometimes see also a very different attitudes when you talk with each and every representative of Central Asia. My final point is that I think that one thing what we should understand very clearly, and sometimes it is not understood by some regional players and some Central Asian nations as well, that we are not, let's say, and hereby we, I dare to speak as more NATO representatives and national representatives, we are not in Central Asia to compete for influence. that's not the goal. And sometimes when we look back at the whole perspective of and prospect of Eastern Partnership, then it was very often viewed as a kind of competition between EU and the United States on one hand and Russia. This time, I just want to say that we have been always very careful to say that we are not competing with everything. There are interests in the region of such players as Russia, as China, as India, as Iran, economic interests, political interests, also some, I would dare to say, geopolitical interests, but we don't want to be seen as another competitor. We want to be seen more as the kind of facilitator of security process, of better trade relations, economic relations, transportation, as well as to some extent also to promote cultural relations. And I think that this is something that also has to be taken into account when we speak about the overall approach that we take when it comes to the region. And I was really glad that during our presidency, and of course also beyond, Latvia is one of those EU member states that is keen to promote that kind of approach, and that this strategy apparently works. It's not a revolutionary kind of, strategy, but it's an incremental approach to a very interesting and very challenging region. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Now I would like to turn the floor to two ambassadors coming from the neighboring region. So we probably will start with Ambassador Stobdan. Please, what would be your vision of the security situation in Central Asia?
Thank you, Professor Ozoliņa, for inviting us here. Well, I have 8 points to make, but I'll make only 4 points right now, and maybe some more points during the intervention. Now, I don't see the scenario ahead very optimistic, because some of the internal, pre-existence unresolved issues are going to be very, very difficult to solve. I don't know whether the EU can intervene in those, but it will make situation far worse, because every ingredient required for a revolution is there in Central Asia, like you saw in Middle East, like Arab Spring or any kind of thing. All the preconditions are there. And I think the succession issue in the next 5 to 6 years will trigger the conflict, the internal conflict. Secondly, we have seen the Kunduz event in Afghanistan, the external dimension. The Taliban has come right at the forefront of Tajikistan. Now, 60% of Tajik-Afghan border is extremely porous and affected by Taliban. Reason why the United States had to now stay put through 2017 with 5,500 troops. And now you have the specter of ISIS, which has been pursued by Hizb ut-Tahrir for the entire Central Asia as a caliphate. For many years, I think 15, 20 years, the HUT, the Hizb ut-Tahrir, has been pursued. I'm not talking about IMU, Islamic Movement of Uzbekistan, but purely HUT has been advocating what ISIS, of course through non-violent means, but towards the same goal. Now imagine, Central Asia does not have only oil and gas. Afghanistan has also got drugs. This is where the ISIS will be controlling. Therefore, and you have the concept of Khorasan, center at the epicenter of Central Asia. I don't know whether it's hyped, but right now ISIS is the most important discourse of security in Central Asia. And I think now, I see Central Asia becoming a victim, or torn into the conflict between Russia and Turkey. Economically, security point of view, and all sorts of things, I think will be affected, and this becomes a very explosive combination. So I see the picture quite gloomy. My number 2 point is that I don't want to talk about the failure and the success of international engagement of the international actors and the regional actors. But let's admit that Central Asia has no security mechanism of its own. There's only one Russian-led collective security treaty organization. But for the CSTO, you would have seen Arab Spring long time back. There is an umbrella. Therefore, Central Asia cannot become Middle East for the time being. Central Asia is also at the back door, close to the epicenter of terrorism, which is Pakistan and Afghanistan. You had the presence of Al-Qaeda right there in Afghanistan, but it could not make a footing in Central Asia, but it went to North Africa, which means collective security treaty is working. And that's why you see a lot of internal conflicts have been contained satisfactorily or not satisfactorily. Somehow this has been quite effective. Now what we are seeing is a new synergy between Russia and China. Whether this is a marriage of convenience or we don't know in the long term how this synergy is going to work, but purely byproduct of Ukraine crisis and United States Asia pivot policy. A unique synergy has come into being in Central Asia, which is the Eurasian Economic Union, and the One Road, One Belt. Let's see how it goes, but I'm not very optimistic on this issue also. I have a different take on. But point is that Central Asia is now drifting towards China very strongly, and in a country like us, we have no choice. Either you accept Chinese or you accept Islamic extremism in Central Asia. If the Russian dominance is weakening, there is no fourth option. A new reality you must accept, as Excellency has just mentioned, that it's it's not easy to expect quick solution right now in Central Asia. John Kerry's visit has indicated that Americans are now willing for dialogue. He's not talking about zero-sum game, which Excellency has just mentioned. He's talking about engine of growth. He's talking about jobs, growth, connectivity, and manufacturing. This is a new change. The new security, new dialogue process, new platform for C5+1. I think it's quite a change. It's a new change. Central Asia 5+1. It's a new process, and how it goes, we need to see. But this is really a change because it's not an Afghan-centric Central Asia policy. This is where I see a change in Central Asian approach, at least also from the European Union perspective. And we have also seen Prime Minister Abe, Prime Minister Modi, Prime Minister of South Korea, many others have rushed to Central Asia recently to redefine Central Asia, not from the zero-sum perspective, but from a totally comprehensive, focused Central Asia policy. And this is a recognition that we cannot narrowly define Central Asia because of conflict in Afghanistan. We have to have far more comprehensive approach, and this is how I see it at the moment. But of course there is a role for European Union. We can deal with this issue, and I'd like to share how India is dealing with this kind of a problem, at least to minimize the negative impact of Central Asia on us. I think we could do it that in the future.
Okay,
thank you
very much for the first round. And now I turn the floor to Ambassador Sajjanhar. Please, your view.
Okay, thank you very much, Žaneta, for this very gracious invitation, and of course, thank you to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia for the invitation. Delighted to be here, and before I make my opening remarks, let me also congratulate the Minister for opening the embassy, Latvian embassy in New Delhi. It was long in coming, and I'm glad that when I was here we got together, and it was the last embassy of the European Union in New Delhi. So it's a very welcome addition. Now, coming to the subject that we're discussing, particularly as far as the security and stability in Central Asia is concerned, I think I would tend to go along with the statements that have been made that, we at times speak of Central Asia as one region, but all the countries are very, very different from each other. Whether it is in terms of population, in terms of topography, in terms of level of development, prosperity, etc. So I think that is something that we need to keep in mind when we try to put all these countries together. The other aspect also I think that we need to keep in mind when we are discussing this issue is that none of these countries, these 5 Central Asian countries, in 1991 when the Soviet Union disintegrated, really wanted to become independent. Independence was handed over to them. Independence was given to them. And in many of the countries, much against their own will. You would see that Kazakhstan was the last country to declare independence on the 16th of December 1991, much after even Russia had declared independence in August of 1991. So in that context, the close nexus, the close relations, the close ties with, as a part of the Soviet Union and with Russia, I think we need to keep that in mind. The reason basically for this was that, and this has been mentioned in the first panel also, that all these countries are landlocked. And some of them are doubly landlocked, in the sense that countries which surround them are themselves also landlocked. For instance, you look at Kazakhstan, you look at Uzbekistan, even their neighbors are also landlocked. So in that sense, the traditional understanding and wisdom used to be that unless you have an outlet to the warm waters, and that is why there used to be the so-called Great Game in the 19th century between the British and the Russian empires. Russia trying to find warm waters in the south of this region. So the wisdom was that unless you had an outlet, unless you had an exit to the warm waters, you would really not be able to survive as an independent, as a viable economy. But I think to the credit, and I definitely don't subscribe to the pessimism that has been articulated, I'm an optimist. And I think what these countries have done, and particularly, since in the morning we have discussed more extensively about Kazakhstan, it is the largest country in area in terms of natural resources. Although I would also say that other countries are also richly endowed, but Kazakhstan, of course, with, as I think the Kazakhs themselves are happy to mention, out of about 110 elements on the Mendeleev's table, they have more than 105 of them in commercially viable quantities, which is great, whether it is uranium, it's iron ore, it's aluminium, it's oil, it's gas, you name it, they have it in. So they have converted this perceived liability of being landlocked into an asset through construction, through creation of what was the earlier Silk Route, right now providing that connectivity, which is so very important, which is so very essential. Whether it is through roads, or it is through railroads, or it is through oil pipelines, or it is through gas pipelines. So I think they have, and as was mentioned by the well-known geopolitical scientist Harold Macfinder in 1904, that this region, Central Asia region, the country or the countries which dominate this region will serve as the pivot of domination of the world, because of the rapidity of land transport and rail transport as compared to maritime transport. So I think what we are seeing today is realization of that. You mentioned about the One Belt, One Road concept that is coming through. I think as far as India is concerned, we are also looking at whether it is TAPI, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline. We can discuss about that. I think that the construction of that is going to commence in December. So that is something we've been talking about it for some time, but the first concrete steps are going to be taken. Now, coming to the points that the Honorable Minister, what you have mentioned, I think I will definitely agree that water is an issue. But water is an issue which, in terms of magnitude, I would consider it to be somewhat of a lesser significance and importance amongst the countries themselves than extremism, than terrorism. Because I was in that region, I was very recently, and I was invited, and the countries of the region are extremely worried at the attractiveness of the Islamic State. A country of 5 million population, Kyrgyzstan, it has had several thousands of people who have gone and joined the ISIS. And I think what really surprises them and also impresses them is that a country of 1.25 billion people, that is a population that is India, with about 160, 170 million Muslims, we have barely people, the numbers who have gone and are known to have associated with ISIS is in the range of about 15, 20, 25, not more than that. Meaning we have seen also in France the attacks that have taken place earlier this month. There also you've had about 1,500 to 2,000 people who have gone and who have had training in Syria and in Iraq. And so I think this is an issue that is consuming them. Particularly some of the countries, and some of them would like to identify it with level of poverty, but I don't think it is in that sense, there can be a direct correlation between going and joining the terrorist groups and poverty, because you have even from prosperous nations, France and other countries of Europe, you have had people going there. I think it's more of ideology. So I think while promoting economic well-being and economic prosperity is an important aspect, but I think if we want to deal with the ideology of ISIS, I think we will have to create a counter narrative, a counter ideology which will need to be shared. And I think this is something that we in India have been working on, India we have been focusing on, and I think this is something that we can definitely speak about. The other aspect, of course, is Afghanistan. I think the Central Asian region has been a beneficiary of the involvement of NATO, United States and ISAF forces in Afghanistan. All of them have been beneficiaries. I would say even countries like China and countries like Russia and India have also been beneficiaries of the NATO engagement in Afghanistan. Because while NATO and the US forces were engaged there, I think all the countries, particularly countries like China, and they have had the time to build up their own economies, their own strengths, so that now they are in a position even to challenge the United States. But I think as the United States and NATO ISAF forces withdraw from there, the responsibility will have to be shouldered by the regional organizations. And there, as you mentioned, Žaneta, we can come to that a little later. But the point I want to make here is that if you look at the condition in Central Asia in 1991, 92, 93, 94, immediately after independence, and if you look at the situation now, I think you will find that in terms of level of prosperity, well-being, all the countries are much better. Number two, and I could give examples, if you look at Kazakhstan, and you can say that the population is small, 16.9 or 17 million, but the per capita GDP, nominal dollar terms, is 13,000. Purchasing power parity terms, $24,000 per capita, which is a significant figure. If you look at even Uzbekistan, it is about purchasing power, PPP per capita GNP is about 5,800, which is something similar to what we have in India. If you look at Turkmenistan, it is nominal GDP is 8,000. So these are good figures in terms of development. I agree that there is a question mark in terms of succession. What happens? But it is the presence of these leaders, whether it is Nazarbayev, or it is Islam Karimov, or it is Rahmonov in Tajikistan, that has provided the stability and the security. They might not have the most vibrant democracies as people in the West might wish to think, but I think in terms of security and in terms of stability, and even in Turkmenistan, whether it was Niyazov and now it is Berdimuhamedov, it has been a smooth transition. So that is a question mark, but I am not overtly worried, because if you look at how things will evolve and at the level of economic development that they have been able to reach, that they should be able to manage this. I agree that the second-rung leadership, second-rung succession has not been put into position. So as far as the water issue is concerned, I agree. But here also we have to see that the problems in the Aral Sea, they have been able to manage to quite some extent. I think in 2008, 2009, Mr. Minister, the situation was that the Aral Sea had lost about 80% to 90% of its water. But after that, with the assistance of World Bank, they have been able to re-energize and bring it significantly back to what it was. I think the water issue that is going to really challenge them and affect them is the sharing of waters with China. Because from China you have the, whether it is the river Ili coming in, which finds its way up to, through Kazakhstan and goes to Russia. I think that is what is going to become the more challenging of the aspects. So let me stop here with my initial comments, and of course we'll come back.
Thank you very much. Again, the list is getting longer and longer, so therefore I'm looking forward for European perspective. So what you will add to this list?
I would add to the list only one thing, but I will rearrange a little bit before adding this only one point. The spectrum of priorities. First of all, I agree with the Minister and with the other speakers that the challenge of the attraction of the Islamic State is big, and this is probably one of the few things that we have in common, Europe and Central Asia. We don't know why young people from Central Asia and why young people from Europe are so attracted by the Islamic State. I don't know if anybody in this room has watched the last Mad Max, the movie. Nobody has watched it. Oh, okay. So when I watched it, I watched it in Paris with a friend of mine who is a journalist, and we had the same reaction coming out of that. We thought, this is the Islamic State. Young people put out in the desert sands with big machines, with guns, with the possibility to enslave women for their sexual ambitions or whatever. Is it that which is attracting young people? It's very interesting what you mentioned about India, and I think would be worth having a good analysis why it has not happened. So this is a big challenge. It is a big challenge for us. It is a big challenge for Central Asia. Now for us and for me as a French citizen, in spite of what we went through in Paris, I'm not worried about the future of the French state. I'm not even worried about the future of Schengen. I think Schengen might be put into parentheses for a while and in some places, and I'm not at all worried for the future of the EU. But if you ask me, am I worried for the future of the Central Asian states? Yes, I am, and I would share mainly your views. For the reasons you've named, I think, except for Kyrgyzstan, in all the other states, and I'm sorry you're a diplomat, but I had to smile a little bit when you said that in Turkmenistan, the transition between Turkmenbashi and Berdimuhamedov was smooth. What do you mean? You're frightening me a little bit. Is it the kind of transition I would like to see in New Delhi? No, of course not. But if you look at these 4 states out of 5 in Central Asia, you have regimes there that are, in the best of cases, the best of cases probably Kazakhstan, you have regimes that do not allow for a political spectrum to take space in the country. And so your comparison with the Arab states is striking to me. The day these regimes fall down, you don't have any other structure capable to deal with the transition than those who are close to the mosque, than those who have been able to work underground. And of course, the lay normal political parties are not capable of doing that. Look at Egypt. You had Mr. Mubarak for how many? 30 years telling the United States, if it's not me, it will be them. Them meaning the Muslim brothers, who were still in the frame of political Islam, I would say, the most correct, who could have succeeded in government, but we've seen what they've done, right? And then, of course, he destroys all the other parties. They're all either in jail or in exile. And then he falls down. Who wins the election first? And there you had elections. In other countries, it might happen without elections, but at gunpoint, right? Who wins the elections? Those who have been capable for years to work through, unofficial networks. And so if you take, with the exception of Kyrgyzstan, this is the situation in all 5 countries there. And on top of that, you have, particularly in Uzbekistan, a huge part of the young population which doesn't see future for them in this kind of state. And they are attracted by Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is also preaching a caliphate, which is also preaching, and then I come to my list, to the destruction of the existing borders. But they claim to be non-violent, and I don't think there are proofs up to now that members of Hizb ut-Tahrir have been violent. But mentally, they prepare the ground for these young people to join IS or the Islamic movement of Uzbekistan or whatever, to go on to fight to Afghanistan. But then, my last point is the point of the borders. The borders inherited from the Soviet Union are extremely complicated everywhere. But in Central Asia, come on, look only at one place, the Fergana Valley. The different enclaves you have there, the water issues with the Uzbek army ready to march in if the Kyrgyz had the bad idea one year not to let the water flow down when the Uzbeks need to flood their cotton fields, right? And then you have someone else who is, on that sense, saying that borders inherited from the Soviet Union are not untouchable. You see whom I mean, the president of Russia. Mr. Putin, by treating Ukraine the way he did, by changing in Europe, so many years after the Second World War, borders by military means, has triggered something into the former Soviet space which is extremely dangerous. And his ideologues and those who preach this new ideology of the Russian world are sending such an awkward message to Kazakhstan in particular. And I don't know whether any of you here have done the job I've done in Moscow, just going around, talking to my usual friends and contacts, either in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs or in the world of political parties, and asking them, what is the Russian world? Is it Novorossiya? In private, you get a pretty clear answer. It is, of course, Novorossiya. It is the north of Kazakhstan. So, by doing that, Russia, which has, I think, a vocation, and it has been mentioned here, to be a stabilizing factor, militarily at least, for Central Asia, is in a way not completely playing itself out of the picture, but making someone like President Nazarbayev, who has been certainly the most faithful and skillful ally to Russia, thinking 2 things. A, Mr. Putin is bellicose. B, he's not quite reliable. I would add even unreliable. And third, and that will be the end of my list, if you look at the last time we had great security challenges in Central Asia, what happened? First time was the civil war in Tajikistan. Second time were the pogroms in southern Kyrgyzstan in 2010. You remember the Kyrgyz president, Mrs. Antumbayeva, begging in Vienna in front of the Council of the OSCE, almost on her knees, for anybody to intervene, including Russia. Who intervened? Nobody. So just imagine what will happen the day you have a greater challenge, right? And there, again, with this new situation we are in since Ukraine, I have, you forgot to mention in my biography that the most challenging job I have had and the nicest was that I spent, as schizophrenic, by the way, I spent 4 years in Tashkent as the director of something called the Open Society Institute. That was schizophrenic but nice, right? But the new situation now with Uzbekistan being very worried with waters, and I don't think water will be an easy thing to deal with in the future. You're right up to now. All these presidents are all coming from the same school, they've all been to the party school, they all speak Russian, and even when things get tough, they can sit down and have a glass of vodka, и договоримся, okay? I don't think that will happen with the next generation. That will be quite different. And you have this powerful Uzbek army. Uzbekistan has the most powerful army in the region, which in 2010, during the pogroms in southern Kyrgyzstan, behaved very nicely. Karimov did not march in. If you take the same situation in Crimea, I asked people in Moscow and people whom I know in the Gosduma and in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, can you give me the name of one single Russian family whose house has been burned in Crimea? Or, by the way, who has been killed? Of course, they can't because there was no one, right? Whereas in Osh, what happened is that over one day you had 150,000 Uzbek, ethnic Uzbeks crossing over to Uzbekistan. Karimov, if there was one time in my life that I could praise Tashkent for its foreign policy, it was in that occasion. Karimov said these are all internal issues of Kyrgyzstan, I don't move. He opened the borders and he opened the camps immediately to ICRC and UNHCR. Now, would any of these countries react the same after what Russia has done with Crimea? In cases when one of their ethnic minorities in the neighborhood country will be treated again as it happened in Osh, without using the military tool? It's an open question, but I think that the new situation created in the CIS by Russia is having there a very big long-term effect and a very destabilizing one. And the last point I would like to make is that China, I think China is, on its land borders, is mainly behaving as an economic, a trade power. On its sea borders, it's a bit different, right? But, it's the first time in the 5,000 years history of China that it has signed concrete border agreements with that central part of the continent, right? And if you look at the infrastructures, if you look at the map of Central Asia, the infrastructures 25 years ago, basically all the roads, the railways, the gas, the pipelines were all going north. If you look at them today, they're all going east. The roads, the railways, all the investments that China is making. So I see China as a power in the region that could really be a helper to enforce stability. But militarily, I don't think it will be China. I think in problems, it should be the CSTO, if the CSTO means business. And I think NATO has the wrong approach, has had the wrong approach by treating the CSTO as it has been treating up to now. I think in the region, there are not too many security organizations, there are too few. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It looks that the first round was quite a difficult exercise to trying to put, at least on one list of one piece of page, the whole extensive setting and different complexes of threats or challenges in the region. But I think that now will be the more difficult question, actually, from my side. So if you put on the list challenges, the next step is to look at what policies to be applied. What are tools which could stabilize the situation in Central Asia in short-term, mid-term or long-term perspective. So because it doesn't matter so much either you are optimist or pessimist at the present moment. It's clear that the complexity of the security fabric in Central Asia is one of the challenges for countries, for the region, for the European Union, and for neighbors as well. So could I ask you, in a very telegraphic manner, try to put forward some ideas what India as a neighbor, European Union, European member states could do to stabilize this region? Could we start again in the same order, Minister? What you would propose?
Well,
You are so optimistic about Latvian presidency in the EU.
well, look, I think that we are doing some mistakes all over again. We somehow want sometimes to rush to save the world everywhere, and we think that the kind of European Union, or in a broader sense Euro-Atlantic community, has obligation or resources or ability to interfere in Africa wherever there are any conflicts. What we sometimes do occasionally, to interfere everywhere, asked or not asked. But I think that we have to pursue some strategies that actually are very important to somehow strengthen the overall fabric of each and every nation in Central Asian region and the region as a whole. First, one thing that we probably were not touching so much upon, but what is very important, and Ambassador, here I was referring to terrorism as issue number one in my list, and only then comes all other things. But all of those countries actually are very secular countries. To some extent, all the presidents, all the governments of those countries are pursuing more secular agenda rather than a kind of, more religion-oriented. And we have some very good ways how we can assist, and what is the fact we are doing. For instance, strengthening, with, by the way, a very strong support from some of governments like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, strengthening, for instance, institutions that are strengthening the secular, let's say, society. That's gender equality. We have NGOs working on women's rights, understanding that this is not going to be an easy task, or this is going to be something that you can achieve in 1 year or 5 years. But I think that this is one of the things where cooperating with those countries we can really strengthen this fabric of society. Second, I think that sometimes our policies of engaging with countries through the dialogue on human rights is either biased or sometimes simply wrong. We tend to issue press releases, we don't do sometimes too much quiet diplomacy, but I think that we can, and there are some good examples through the dialogue we have, and I chair too, as I said, with Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. We can advance also some of this agenda to mitigate some of very, very difficult issues that we all see. And here again, we shouldn't be too much oriented on double standards. We sometimes tend to criticize regions and nations we are not really interested and cooperate with the other nations and regions that have the same issues of human rights, political freedoms, and all of a sudden we are great friends. And even one of my colleagues in the beginning of this year, when she got a bit too critical about another big issue, had to retract to some extent. So this is something where we have to find the right balance, how we on one hand pursue some, let's say, more liberal, more democratic agenda while not spoiling too much of the whole relations. And finally, it's again the great experience we have had, I would say actually they have had in 1990s as European Union and United States vis-a-vis Russia, and we have had vis-a-vis Eastern Partnership. We somehow either try to demonize one or another person, a leader, or to make a saint, and then we fail in both. I think that our approach has to be that we have to engage in ways that we talk with everyone, but we don't put too much emphasis on that or another, let's say, leader trying to somehow preserve also all channels of communication. So what the EU can do, I already said, we had some of good ideas where we have tried to get, and those who were saying that countries in Central Asia are very different and we need to have individual approach. At the same time, we have found that at least there are two issues where we can really get all countries sitting around the same table. One was counterterrorism effort. For the first time at the beginning of this year, they all were sitting at the same table with the EU, trying to devise some counter-terrorism strategies, more cooperation, more information sharing, and so on. And second, I do believe that there is a real interest to have also some of EU modernization programs being applied in all of those. Apart from one country, all actually have been interested in closer cooperation when it comes to modernization of their education system. Those are all long-term engagements, but we should also understand that the approach that we can come in to solve all problems is not going to work. That's for Central Asia, but also we have to engage with all key regional actors. I mentioned some of them. Thank you for adding also Japan, Korea. I can add also further Turkey, Pakistan, all the regional countries where you can find the need to cooperate more.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Stobdan, you said that you prepared also the second list where you will continue with India. Could you please do in a telegraphic way, because there are already hands raised?
Okay, sure. Well, all of us got stakes in Central Asia, different but also similar. Perhaps the European Union has got more stakes. You have the energy, you have the drugs, you have the terrorism, and also you have the refugee. Supposing you have a crisis in Central Asia, where will these people go? They're not going to go to Pakistan or China. They're all going to rush to Turkey or Europe. So this is a very much a possibility that you need to consider. Secondly, please don't get into conflict management. Issues like border, ethnic issues and the water issues are so complicated. Even Russians do not want to intervene, or they don't want to intervene. It's very, very complicated. It only adds to the problem. Now, EU has some good programs. I think your economic programs are very good, like the partnership with Kazakhstan, $38 billion or $40 billion, extremely good. Some of the education programs, the capacity building programs are extremely good. Those things must be taken ahead. Secondly, we have limitations. We can't match the Chinese and the Russians in Central Asia. We have a lot of limitations. Somebody mentioned about connectivity, accessibility and all that. But we don't talk about democracy, we don't talk about human rights, but we do everything to facilitate democracy. Training them, get into parliamentary debate, take them into United Nations bodies. So I've seen many European countries tend to support European partners, European friends. We support the Central Asian candidate for any elections in the UN just to get them exposure. We train them in United Peacekeeping mechanism. We train them in so many things so that they also understand what is third world country, what is developing country, in order to get them outside the Russian fold. So there are many experiments you can do to make them more confident and to develop a sense of ownership, sense of responsibility in their own security. Now, our approach is, instead of being outside the mechanism, please be inside the mechanism. You can't leave it to the Russians and the Chinese to do everything what they want to do. So we want to become member of SCO. We just become a member, we have a free trade now with the Eurasian Economic Union. We haven't said yes to one belt, one road as yet, but eventually we will do. The idea is to be inside, you know what to do. You can moderate, you can soften the whole process, rather than being outside and take confrontation as view. So this is our mechanism. The idea is to create an alternative model. a safety cushion, safety value in the future, so that you can at least minimize the damage or the negative impact that might have on us. I don't know about the European Union, I'm sure you also do a lot of things. My only submission here for the European Union is there are clear-cut projects. Now people are talking about Islam and terrorism. Talking about ISIS and fundamentalism is one thing, but talking about Islam in Central Asia is another thing. Please make it very clear. Central Asian Islam is not the Islam that you see elsewhere. We had a traditional Central Asian Islam, unfortunately, because of aggressive Soviet oppression of killing the Sufism. Now you have the revivalism. The Soviets did a very bad things to overtly killing the Islam. So you have the reaction now from the Wahhabis, Salafis, the Tabligis, and all sorts of schools have come up. And enough damage has been done to Central Asia in the name of Islam. Now please, we can still rescue Central Asia. Don't allow Central Asia be infected by this, what is going on in Syria and Iraq. And that is possible if you nurture Sufism, because Sufism is based on spiritualism. It's not based on political ideas like Khilafat and all that kind of things. So we have a lot of assets, we have a lot of resources, what to do with Sufism. Now if you can get into projects, there are various Sufi schools in Central Asia, dozens of them. Any one of them, just pick up Uzbekistan or in Tajikistan or even Kyrgyzstan in Osh or Fargana, anywhere. You can take a few projects, how Sufism can be revived. That's the best solution. So for that you need resources, expertise, and clear-cut focused projects.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Ambassador Sajjanhar, what about your ideas?
Okay, my ideas, I think, as I mentioned, just take off that the West, NATO, US, ISAF did enough during, from 2001 onwards till now to deal with Afghanistan. Now I think it is the turn of the regional countries to step up to the plate. And by that I mean India, I mean China, I mean Russia, I mean Iran, Turkey, Central Asian states, etc. Now if you look at the experience of what has happened over the last 1 year plus, because that is when 2014, that is when NATO has started withdrawing. And what the new president in Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, he came and he said that he's going to work along with Pakistan and along with China to deal with the Taliban threat. And the two demands that he had made, number one is that the attacks by Taliban in Afghanistan would come down, and number two, that Pakistan will be able to deliver Taliban to the negotiating table so as to be able to talk with them. But none of these has succeeded. It's been already more than a year, none of this has succeeded. There was just one meeting, I think in July or something, with Taliban, and that is also with the second rung leadership. So I think it is really time for the regional countries to come in and to start working that. So far it has been, and that meeting also took place in Pakistan, in Moree in Pakistan. So if we are saying that the peace process, the negotiating process has to be Afghan-led, Afghan-owned, and in Afghanistan's interest, then why should it be taking place outside Afghanistan? It should be taking place in Afghanistan. So I think all these countries, and particularly, since the United States is also going to be there for some time, all these countries need to be. I think also in terms of, like here in the case of dealing with ISIS, and at Antalya in Turkey, US and Russia said we will deal with ISIS, we will work together. I think here also, when we are dealing with a common adversary, with a common enemy, I think both the United States and Russia can really come on the same side, on the same platform, be together and work on this. We need to take also sort of, as far as, and I agree with you, Minister, when you said that these are secular, these are not the Wahhabi, Salafi sect of Islam that is there. Actually, Sufism came out in the 11th century from Turkestan in the south of Kazakhstan, and that is how it got to the other parts of the world. So I think it is something that has emanated, that has originated from that area. Rather than, and if you look at the policy and the approach that, let's say, India had in the case of Myanmar, for instance. We were not, while the world, the United States in particular, was criticizing Myanmar from the rooftops. I think our engagement with Myanmar was behind the scenes, advising them and telling them that the way to go forward is to open up transparency, democracy. And that is what we see over a short period of about 4 years, from 2011 to 2015 when we had the elections recently. I think there's been such a remarkable change. So I think in Central Asia, that is the way that we need to approach. The other is in the area of education, because when we are talking about a change in the mindset, a change in the mental attitude, I think the most important, the most powerful agent of transformation is education. So I think in terms of collaborating with them, education, capacity development, and we have hundreds, India has hundreds and thousands of people who are also from Afghanistan. We got them, whether it was parliamentarians, whether it was in different areas, whether it is skill development or it is in these areas. And so also we do it with Central Asia also. And I think that is something that we can. The other aspect, one last element that I will mention is through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We have become a member of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. 2016, the meeting in Uzbekistan, in Tashkent, we will take over. And I think that will give us an opportunity, because Central Asia has today been identified as a strategic partner of strategic importance. That's why our Prime Minister went to all the 5 countries in July of this year to establish a personal rapport. And in those countries we have seen it is the personal rapport with the top leadership.
Thank you very much. More or less you were also supporting those arguments were mentioned before. But Mr. Délétroz, you belong to this pessimistic group of presenters, so what would be your?
Well, I try not to be pessimistic, but just analytical, right? Sorry. For our perspective from Europe, first of all, I take the opportunity before the minister runs to defend the budget of his ministry to underline the great job that Latvia has done during your presidency to review this EU Central Asia strategy. I think you've been really hands-on, and you've brought into the discussion also civil society sectors from Central Asia, which had not been done by your predecessors in this. Now, I think this EU Central Asia strategy is good, but we have to know that the EU impact in Central Asia is quite modest. Just to take 2 figures, the level of China's involvement, China is putting in the region 40 billions. The EU, the strategy, if I'm not mistaken, is 1 billion over 7 years. Now, if you talk with the people in the region, they don't expect any security stuff from the EU. They see that when in Europe things are burning, like in Ukraine, it's not Mrs. Mogherini who is stepping in, but Mrs. Merkel and François Hollande, right? They see quite clearly what the Normandy framework means for Mrs. Mogherini and the External Action Service in Brussels. But the other thing, as a NATO member, I think because of the explosive situation in which the world is, I think what I already mentioned before, NATO has now to stop accusing CSTO of being a new Cold War setup, when at the end of the day you could say people in NATO who react like that may be still in a Cold War framework. I think it is time to exchange notes on Central Asia between the 2 organizations. My big question is whether the Russians mean business with CSTO. And in 2010 in Kyrgyzstan, clearly they did not mean business. But if they mean business, if they are serious about that, there will be a need for interventions in the region, unfortunately. There will be destabilizations of some of the most fragile states. And my last point on education and kind of EU soft power, I think again in the strategy it was very well thought out to re-engage most of the EU money towards Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan. Kyrgyzstan is the only democracy. It is still a little bit a chaotic democracy, but okay. You know, it was just over coffee break we were mentioning there's this association between the Respublika Party and Atatürk to get the government. Okay, you could say, okay, Berlin is also chaotic democracy because you have a Große Koalition or whatever. But really, putting the money in these two, Tajikistan is a bit different, of course, but in Tajikistan there are some openness, and external money can make a difference provided they are well engaged and a good follow-up is being done. And on education, I agree very much. I think particularly for Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, I don't see any possibility with these two countries to engage deeply now, except of continuing having our contacts there, having Profs with them and showing our love and friendship for them. But education, having people from these two countries getting education abroad, coming back with some views of where the world is and how you can run properly a country. And on Kazakhstan, I think Kazakhstan is more at the political level. I would say that on Kazakhstan, Nazarbayev is probably one of the smartest presidents in the region. And he could be convinced, but maybe I'm too optimistic now, I'm too naive. But I think he could, or at least he should be convinced by all the states represented here, including Turkey and India, that it is time for him to prepare his succession. And I know the Russians have been doing that, right? Basically, he has this younger generation around. He has a load, unlike Berdimuhamedov or Karimov, to have a younger generation being out there with a voice which is not always the Nazarbayev voice. And now he should be really encouraged to carry on. Otherwise, the succession there and in Tashkent are, for me, the two biggest question marks for the region and possibly the most disruptive question marks.
Thank you very much. Now it's time for questions. So I see already two hands, three. We could take all three questions together because Minister has to leave, and then the panel will answer. So please, Ambassador, we'll start with... okay. Then... Okay, sorry, the lady behind you.
Yeah. Okay. Ilo Palace, Director of Marta Resource Center for Women. I just wanted to ask you, how do you see the role of civil society in this region, in these countries, in combating organized crime, prevention of radicalization, and generally, how to say, facilitating security?
Thank you. Now, Ambassador, please. So, the role of civil society.
Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate all the speakers because they really went deep into the subject, and I think they covered all aspects. And I'd especially like to praise the Latvian presidency for putting Central Asia among its priorities. I think it's really relevant. I also praise them for promoting this new strategy approach towards Central Asia, in which, of course, the High Representative and ex-Foreign Minister of Italy, Mogherini, played a huge, important role. I think really the involvement of EU, some last speaker has been critical about that, but it really depends on the support that it gets from the EU public opinions, also the ones coming from Southern Europe, for instance. We Italians have been greatly involved in Afghanistan. We've sent in the past nearly 1,000 troops. Now there are quite a few hundred still. The idea is, of course, to pacify the area, but also, of course, stopping terrorism and fighting drug trafficking, in which, of course, sometimes some organized crime organizations are involved. So, really, I think it was of paramount importance to send this new positive look with the new strategy towards the area, and really make public opinion in the South understand that it's important to be there, that Central Asian countries can cooperate also to stop terrorism and drug trafficking. Of course, education is a fundamental mean. This issue of eradicating drug cultures in Afghanistan is really a difficult one, but I think we're on the right track. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Then please pass the microphone here, and then we will go to you.
Good afternoon. My name is Maris Domic, State Delegate of Latvia, and I would like also to thank all panelists for a very comprehensive and deep analysis I would like to underline also Latvian initiatives also taken during the presidency of Latvia in EU Council, and at this point I would like to mention BOMKA, Border Management Program in Central Asia program, which Latvia agreed to undertake responsibility. This is a long-lasting border security management program in Central Asia. It's already 9th phase, and formerly it was implemented by United Nations Development Program. And this year it's the first time when this 3-year-long program will be led by a consortium of one of EU countries, so under Latvian lead. And we have 4 consortium consisting of four countries and one international organization, and several Latvian agencies involved, border security. I would like also, my question probably is in overall context of our discussion. What's your opinion as a specialist working quite a long time in the region, also with the questions related to the region? What is impact, what is a contribution of the international organizations in the field of bringing border security by different capacity building projects?
Thank you very much. And please, you can.
Olga Spazia again. I'd like to build on the last point that Ambassador Sajjanhar has mentioned. The fact that the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is getting bigger and growing due to new membership of India and Pakistan. This was decided this year, and I had already the pleasure to discuss with you during the coffee break. Now I'd like to know the opinions of the other panelists, especially since I was wondering already why the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was not so much mentioned. Is that because it is not really considered to be an effective organization format to deal with security threats in the region, or because it was just forgotten? And now that we have these new members, is that rather, do you think, something that could dynamize this organization, whose performance so far was rather modest in security terms, or is it a rather risk that it could be even further paralyzed? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much for excellent questions. So Minister has to go after a moment, so probably we could give floor first to Minister to answer, but I would encourage probably divide those questions among you, not to repeat one by one and answering all those 4 questions. So you could pick what you would like out of those questions and then to respond to that one. So we have the role of civil society in security sector. Then we have the role of public opinion of southern countries, and indeed, if for instance I refer to Latvian public opinion polls, and in terms of recipient countries of development cooperation, Central Asian countries go as the second ones after Eastern Partnership countries. So in the Baltic states, I think we are more or less okay with our public opinion. So then there was a question about international organizations in border management issues, and also role of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So, Minister, please, let's start with you.
Oh, that's an easy one now, because on Marta's question, actually, I already answered in my previous intervention. I think that everything that NGOs can do to strengthen secular societies and also to assist in any way they can, it's already being done, and Marta itself provides an excellent example of that. On public opinions, I think that one issue that we haven't mentioned, but which immediately can wake up any public opinion within the European Union immediately, is migration. So just let's tell our publics that if something goes terribly wrong in Central Asia, being bad transition, the overall explosion, then I think we all understand that there is going to be another source of migration everywhere, also touching Europe. And I think that that is something that we always should remember. By the way, one of still sources of migration we are all affected is Afghanistan. And people from Afghanistan are in Italy, are in Greece, are in Turkey as far as I know. They are entering also, trying to enter Latvia, crossing the Russian-Latvian, Belarusian-Latvian border and so on. So this is something where you can easily wake up every public in Europe, and I think that this is something that we should also underline. If we don't address issues now, we are in the process of getting possible trouble. Well, I will not go into Bonka. I think this is something that is a very good example of how we actually are also helping to address some of those challenges. And on Shanghai Organization and CSTO, I think that Shanghai Organization, first of all, is still the cooperation organization where, sorry to say, but China and Russia is still trying to balance both to some extent. If it may come to the kind of, also the solver of some security challenges, fine. But I think this is a bit balancing organization between two powers that really are interested in the region. On CSTO, well, look, I think that we still have to understand how serious this organization is. Because frankly, if you have Uzbekistan suspending the membership, if you have all those issues that we are now facing in Ukraine, if we do see that basically this organization is very much Russia's oriented, then I still reserve some benefit of the doubt whether any kind of formal exchanges or discussions would help or not. But I have a benefit of doubt. I have to deeply apologize for running out. It's not that I want to escape further questions or the criticism from my panel members. You can do that freely when I leave, but unfortunately this is a bit tense day also here in Riga in Parliament.
Thank you, Minister, for coming. So we will excuse you, but we still have some 5-7 minutes to go to give the floor also to other speakers to respond to questions. Actually, we started 10 minutes late, so
don't forget you have lunch too.
Yes,
a very difficult thing.
No more than 7 minutes. So
Good luck.
We have enough time for lunch.
and then we will off for lunch indeed. Yeah.
Great pleasure.
So, please, who would like to respond? Yes, please.
Well, on CSCO, first of all, I'm not surprised that someone from Sciences Po is asking that. No, I'm joking because I'm a former student from Sciences Po. I would agree with what the minister said. I think it is potentially a great organization, and potentially it gathers, when you have an organization having in it only China and India, I don't want to be despective of the other ones, but you cannot say it's not a strong organization, right? But concretely on Central Asia, I haven't seen up to now much concrete outputs, but I think the potential is there. We just have to see. I've seen summits taking place in Central Asia, which was great for these countries, the countries that hosted this summit, but in terms of concrete output up to now, as SCO, no, I haven't seen. On civil society is very diverse in Central Asia. There are two countries where it is practically destroyed. One is Uzbekistan, the other one is Turkmenistan. Then you have one country in which it is very strong. It is Kyrgyzstan. And I think in Kyrgyzstan it will remain strong for what one of the speakers this morning already mentioned, for the reasons that any government there knows that they can be ousted by the street, And I think when you know that, you're careful with civil society. And I think also in Tajikistan, you have also strong potentials there. And for our democratic states to engage in the region is to support politically and also financially civil society indeed. But you see that even in Kyrgyzstan, you have a legislation coming up in parliament which is quite similar to what Putin has done in Russia with his foreign agents and all that. So for the moment, my best wishes to civil society in the region. You have quite courageous actors there. Some are in jail, some are in exile, and I think the future will be tough. But without a strong civil society, it's difficult to build afterwards a real modern state. And I have some experience of working in Latin America also, and I think you have been there too, right? If you look in Latin America after the dictatorships, the military dictatorships of the 70s, the countries that really emerged quickly as building sustainable states are indeed those in which, even under the military governments, they managed to keep some kind of civil society. In a place like Chile, it was clearly through the Catholic Church that opposed the regime, unlike in Argentina, where the bishops were quite clearly on the side of the militaries. And for Central Asia, I think it's the big question for the future, and there are too many of them, of those good people who are now in exile in our countries.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think that we will have still time to discuss different issues over lunch, yeah? So please, Ambassador.
Yes, thank you very much. Let me very quickly come to a couple of these questions. First to the SCO. You know, the SCO, as we were discussing over the tea break also, it started off basically to settle borders between China and all the Central Asian states and Russia. So earlier, when it was put into position in 1997-96, it was Shanghai 5. That means China, Russia, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. It has settled the borders. So basically, that was the idea, and to ensure that the Uyghur movement, the East Turkestan movement, that they would not create problems as far as the China neighboring areas. So as far as the purpose, the mandate of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, it became that in 2001 with the inclusion of Uzbekistan. So that was settled, but after that it has been expanding its role to deal with terrorism, to deal with extremism, and of course as far as economic, whether it is connectivity or energy, etc. Now, what you say, I agree with you that it has the potential, but it has not really delivered because it has not been asked to deliver so far. They have been organizing these peace mission exercises in China, in Russia, in Yekaterinburg, with participation of forces from all these countries. I think the time has come now for it really to act in some way. It has been holding these meetings on Afghanistan for the last, I think, 6-7 years, where although Afghanistan is not a member, now it has become I think it's a permanent invitee there. There are discussions that are taking place on Afghanistan in SCO every year, where the Afghan president always attends all the summits. Other aspect, of importance of an organization is that SCO summits have taken place every year. That means all the countries find value that we need to get together and we need to discuss the issues. I think the organization will get significantly strengthened with the inclusion of India and Pakistan. As I told you, I don't think that the bilateral India-Pakistan issues are going to be discussed there, but I think for the region, and since India has identified Central Asia as an area of strategic significance and importance for us, and it will provide us with an opportunity, provide India with an opportunity to interact with them every year at the top leadership level. And Afghanistan is going to be definitely an issue that is good. So I think it is definitely going to be helpful. As far as CSTO is concerned, I think one needs to recognize that as far as Central Asia, whatever else we keep it apart, but as far as Central Asian states are concerned, Russia continues to be the sole guarantor of security and stability. In 2010, when Bakir had to fly away, but he flew away to Moscow. So, in that sense also, there was a contribution of Russia and CSTO. So I don't think one can deny the role or contribution of Russia as far as the security paradigm or matrix of Central Asia is concerned. Let me finish that, and I think we'll have opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much. We definitely have opportunity. So please, Ambassador Stobdan.
Right, okay. Civil society, yes, I agree with the previous speaker. Very open in Kyrgyzstan, but too much civil society activities, very dangerous. Otunbayeva tried to do that. She was shown the way. Atambeck took over immediately because of her love affair with the European Union, OAC, and all that kind of thing. That OSH thing, you remember how police from the OAC came in the the SCO protected the regime. So all that thing is quite tricky there. SCO no longer relevant after war. One Belt, One Road. SCO was a one-man show, China. At the Chinese expense, SCO was running. But still very relevant because it has got a lot of legal issues. It protects the regime against criticism from the outside. It has a center for anti-terrorist center in Tashkent, RATS. It's very useful. People, for a country like India, they get a lot of information. So that's quite interesting, still relevant, but the traction is now gone after Chinese have launched the Silk Route program and all that, the grandest thing. So it's less thing. Border, I think yes. If you involved in border conflict, tricky. If you intervene in the border management and training, we do, like for example, giving them computers for tracking money laundering, crime. They love it. They like it. This is quite possible. Drug trafficking, I thought NATO and CSTO will collaborate on drug trafficking. But the danger is if NATO and CSTO collaborates, drug trafficking towards Europe cuts down, it goes towards China and India. That's another danger. The 80% comes toward Europe, only 10 to 20% comes to South Asia or East Asia. Because even the Chinese borders are very porous, because they can't stop drug trafficking. So it can be regulated actually, drug trafficking, wherever you want to regulate. Depends on who collaborates where. So it's quite tricky again. And the rest, I think, overall I see European Union is an opportunity for Central Asians. They also see now trans-partnership, Pacific TPP is also an exciting thing for Kazakhstan as a future thing. It could be quite an opportunity. For Japan, Turkey, India, they see it's an inspiring model. The issue is whether these inspirations, whether these aspirations, whether these opportunities can be put together to make a global strategy for Central Asia. Other than this piecemeal kind of approach to Central Asia is not going to work. We've tried for 35 years or 25 years. It hasn't gained the traction. Russia still has the dominance. You can't rule it out. To offset the Russian influence there is going to be very, very difficult without annoying the people there. It can be quite difficult. And we understood this. I worked in 25 years in that area, various capacities here and there. I was also academic. It's quite entrenched, vertically and horizontally. A political elite and at the mass level. The media controls. What can you do with any civil society activities when Russian media controls everything?
Thank you. Probably it was not exactly the argument I would like to hear in the end of this panel. but I think that overall, wrapping up, not the last one, but wrapping up the whole panel, I would like to say that actually we all achieved the aim of this panel, because the aim was really to look at security as a comprehensive concept. And indeed, what you mentioned, starting with peacekeepers training, BOMCA, borders, but also education and civil society, it really lays a very wide ground for different international organizations, but also for individual countries to contribute to security and stability of this region. So thank you very much, and I will invite all of you to join me in a round of applause thanking panelists and also going for lunch.